I would, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order to the Assembly Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. Committee Secretary, please call the roll.
Assemblywoman Dickman. Here. Assemblyman Frierson. Here. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Here. Assemblywoman Howdegi. Here. Assemblyman Levitt. Here. Assemblyman Matthews. Here. Assemblyman MacArthur. Here. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Assemblywoman Thomas. Assemblywoman Torres. Here. Chair Miller.
And when Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno arrives and Assemblywoman Thomas, please mark them present. I know that they're just finishing up with some meetings and such. So with that, again, good afternoon. So glad to see people here in the room with us. Happy to see you all. We're excited to be here in the room with you as well. And I know we've been doing this for a few days now, so it changes a little bit how the committee operates. This is our first time joining again physically in the room together. So we know that we will have some people presenting and testifying on Zoom, some on the phone lines, and of course here in person, and we're so happy to see you all. Just a few reminders that while we're in the room, we will all continue to wear our mask. There will be public comment at the end of the agenda for up to a half hour. And of course, always reminding everyone early that everyone will have up to 2 minutes to speak for public comment. And anytime you testify or speak, we need to ask that you say your full name and spell it so that we have everything correct on the record. Today we have 2 bills that we will hear, and we will take them in order on the agenda. The first bill will be Assembly Bill 441. So Speaker Frierson, thank you. He's headed on up to the table for us. And with that, again, I would like to go ahead and open the hearing on Assembly Bill 441. It will be presented by Speaker Jason Frierson, and this measure relates to legislative provisions regarding the vacancy and appointment of legislators and campaign funds. And so, please proceed when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairwoman Miller, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jason Frierson. I am the Assemblyman for District 8 and Speaker of the Nevada State Assembly. I am here, of course, to present Assembly Bill 441, which serves as a mechanism to handle the financial and practical burden of appointed members of the legislature who are appointed shortly before or during a legislative session. As you all know, NRS 294A-300 states that it is unlawful for a member of the legislature to solicit or accept any monetary contribution or solicit or accept a commitment to make such a contribution for any political purpose during the specified period of time before and after a legislative session. Generally, a legislator may not receive or solicit a contribution during the period beginning 30 days before and ending 30 days after a regular session and 15 days before or after a special session. We refer to that as the blackout period. Additionally, campaign funds may not be used for personal use, which is defined as an expense that would exist irrespective of whether a person was a legislator. However, many expenses, such as paying rent and for living space here in Carson City during session, exist only because the person is a legislator. This expense qualifies as an allowable use of campaign funds. Of course, serving in the legislature is an honor and it's a privilege, but I don't think it's lost on this body that we are a citizens' legislature doing the people's work with little compensation. Here in Nevada, our legislators earn $164.69 per day, and that's only for the first 60 days. That's about $9,800 for the first 60 days, and that's every other year. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, the average yearly salary of lawmakers across the country is $33,500. For us legislators, particularly those of us from Southern Nevada, we're forced to relocate over 400 miles away from our districts to do the people's work, and with limited financial means. As a result, we are often forced to use our leftover campaign funds to meet the real financial burden of serving our state. Legislators who are appointed during the blackout period don't have any unused campaign funds. They're not able to accept or solicit monetary contributions during a blackout period, and in these instances, the legislators personally pay for unreimbursed expenses that are required in order for them to be able to move and maintain a living space in Carson City during session. With this reality in mind, AB 441 was brought to address those issues. Unfortunately, for those of us who have been here in the last few sessions, we've lost several members in both chambers, near or during session, and it became apparent that for those in particular who were appointed during a blackout period, they were forced to use personal income to serve as a member of this body. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, Nevada is one of 29 states that places restrictions on giving and receiving campaign contributions during a legislative session, but 15 states have a general ban on all contributions. However, 14 of the remaining states only have limitations that apply to the ban on contributions from lobbyists and or political action committees. A small number of these states prohibit lobbyists from making campaign contributions at any time, including during a legislative session. This bill will allow the legislative caucuses as well as fellow legislators the ability to contribute to an appointed member during a blackout period. In addition, the bill will only give leadership in both the majority and minority caucuses the ability to reassign BDRs of members who have left this body. I'll now walk through the provisions of the bill. Section 1 of the bill addresses what happens to bill drafts when a vacancy occurs after the general election and before a regular session starts. If the vacancy is in the majority party, the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader may reassign, and consequently, in the minority caucus leaders of both caucuses would be able to reassign. The leaders must also submit lists of the reassigned BDRs to the Legislative Council by the 8th day of the session, and they may revise that list no later than the 15th day. Any reassigned BDRs are in addition to the BDRs a Senate or Assembly member would normally have. Section 2 of this bill has to do with campaign contributions for members who are appointed to fill a vacancy during the time when legislators are prohibited from soliciting or accepting contributions, often referred again as the blackout period. Under this bill, the member who was appointed may solicit and accept contributions during that blackout period from a legislative caucus or a fellow legislator. Those contributions are capped at $10,000 for a regular session and $1,200 for a special session. They may not be used to cover expenses other than the expenses for moving, travel, and housing that are over the supplemental allowance that they receive. Section 4 of the bill concerns the meaning of the term personal use of campaign contributions. Under existing law, it is unlawful for candidates and public officers to spend contributions for personal use. This bill specifies that personal use does not include paying for legislators' moving, travel, and housing expenses over and above the supplemental allowance that all legislators are entitled to receive. Section 5 addresses the disposal of campaign contributions. Under existing law, if a candidate is elected and has campaign funds that they didn't spend or commit before the election, they must dispose of that money by returning it to the contributors, using it in the next campaign cycle, contributing to another campaign, or other methods that are existing in statute. This bill authorizes a candidate elected to the Senate or the Assembly to dispose of campaign contributions also by contributing to a member who is allowed under Section 2 to accept contributions because they were appointed to fill a vacancy. Sections 6 through 9 are conforming changes, and Section 10 deals with the effective date, which would be upon passage and approval. In conclusion, it is an honor to serve in this institution, but the reality is our appointed members make a significant sacrifice to be a member of this body with very short notice. I think AB 441 is a reasonable measure to ensure that we ease any financial burden to that process and ensure that we remove barriers that hinder those from serving in this body. Essentially, you should not have to be independently wealthy to be appointed to serve to fill a vacancy. And under the current law, the only way that you can fill a vacancy and be able to live is if you have the financial means to do so. And so this bill is attempting to remedy that, to give everybody greater access to the democratic process and have a greater ability to serve. And I think that we are oftentimes unable to find candidates who are able, although they're great candidates, to financially carry a burden that the rest of us are not required to carry. So that is my conclusion, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this legislation forward. We will start off our questions coming from Vice Chair Howdy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Speaker Frierson, for bringing AB 441 forward. I just had some clarifying questions to make sure I'm reading the language correctly. Under Section 2, Sub 2, where you talked about the caps on the amounts that they can solicit during or request during a regular session or special session, it says 10,000 for a regular session or 1,200 for a special session. That's just in total, not per, like, I can't get 10,000 from my chair and then 10,000 from my colleague, correct? Am I reading that?
Thank you again for the record, Jason Frierson. Assemblywoman Howdy, through Madam Chair to you, yes, you're correct. It's a total of $10,000. I don't know that anyone would need necessarily more than that. This is intended to cover living expenses so that folks who are appointed are able to serve.
Thank you. And if I could, Madam Chair, just one follow-up. And again, Speaker, just clarifying question, just make sure I'm reading it correctly. Sub 3 in that same section where it talks about dollars that were raised that weren't used or expended. So if an appointed member received $10,000 during a regular session but only spent $5,000, then they would have to return the $5,000 or get rid of it? Is that correct?
That's correct. To some extent, they join this body, but they don't have the interim that led up to the session of fundraising and the same obligations as far as having to return it. They haven't run an election, and so we thought it was reasonable to just simply make this bill about allowing these individuals who are appointed to be able to afford to be up here for that session and not have any extra consequences or obligations beyond returning any unspent money.
Okay, thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Madam Chair.
And I apologize if I didn't. Again, Jason Frierson, I got to get back into that habit.
Yes, and also, Speaker, you may go directly to the members.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Our next question is coming from Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Speaker, for the presentation. I really appreciate this legislation as I think it's resolving an issue that we've seen all too often during my time here at the legislature. My question is regarding Section 2 of the bill that's looking specifically at giving them the ability to accept those monetary contributions. As I read it, and perhaps I'm reading it wrong, Section 2, subsection 1, it states that a legislator who was appointed to fill a vacancy in the office of legislator during a period described in subsection 1, and then as I read subsection 1, I think that period would only apply then if the session has not yet started. So this would, my understanding then is that this would not be applicable if the session has already started, or how would that impact somebody who is maybe appointed in the middle of the session?
Thank you again, Jason Frierson, for the record. Assemblywoman Torres, thank you for the question. The intent of the bill is to allow individuals who are appointed during session to be able to raise up to $10,000 from a total from either caucuses or from members to be able to provide for living expenses. That is the point. So it's covering individuals who are appointed either within the 30-day period before session starts, during session, or within the 30-day period, presumably afterwards. 15 similar for special sessions. Obviously, for an appointed member, the 30 and 15 days afterwards is not relevant because they would be required to return money that they didn't spend during that session that they were appointed to serve in.
Okay, our next question is from Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this addresses a really big problem that we've had, especially it seems like in the last few years, we've had so many people appointed. My question has to do, though, with the number of bills, because I'm not exactly understanding this either. So if someone was appointed within, say, the time when, the deadline to get your first 5 bills in, so would the person who was replaced, would that be an addition of those 5 bills that they would have had too?
I'm sorry.
The person who was unelected, or not unelected, but who couldn't fulfill their term for whatever reason. So if someone got appointed, in time to do their 5 bills, like what is that deadline date? Is it mid-December?
So again, Jason
Would there
Frierson,
be
for the
5
record.
extra bills for someone?
Again, Jason Frierson, for the record. The purpose of this section is because we all have constituents that reach out to us and ask for bills.
Right.
And before session starts, I may have a bill, and Assemblywoman Dickman, you may have somebody approach you with the same bill, and you may have decided, well, Speaker Frierson already has that bill, so it's covered, and then for whatever reason, I have to resign. Well, that constituent was deprived of the ability to have that concept vetted because people made decisions based on who was carrying BDRs. So this would not be additional BDRs in total. This would be preserving the ability to reassign some of those BDRs that the individual who resigned committed to, and it can be provided to the person who was appointed or anybody else in the legislature so that those bills were not lost. It doesn't mandate that they be reassigned, but certainly it allows the leadership of all 4 caucuses to reassign those that were already submitted.
Thank you for that, and I just want to understand this. So they could be bills that had been pre-filed or just ideas, it could be anything like that, right? But it's not like that seat is now going to have potentially 10 bills instead of 5, right?
Correct. Again, Jason Frierson, for the record, you're correct. It's not additional bill drafts, it's preserving the opportunity to reassign existing submitted bills to other legislators or the appointed if they were able to, but presumably it would be more experienced legislators who would have the ability to take that same number, not additional. But in theory, you could submit all of your allotted bill drafts, and then your colleague could resign, and then your caucus leader could give you those bill drafts to see through, which would be above and beyond your personal number, but not above and beyond the total number of bills that would be considered by the legislature.
Got it. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Assemblyman Matthews?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question regarding Section 2, Sub 1, where it says that these contributions could come from another legislator or from an organization whose primary purpose is to provide support for legislators, particular party and House. You think you made it clear that the intent there is for that to apply to caucuses. Conceivably, could that also apply to some other entity, a PAC or some other third party that is formed, created for the express purpose, whose mission statement, for example, is to provide support for legislators of a particular party or House?
Thank you again. For the record, Jason Frierson. The intent is to allow caucuses to help appointed candidates as well as other members and no other organizations.
Thank you. A follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you for that answer. I'm wondering if obviously the blackout period goes for the 30 days after session, and obviously under this, the appointed lawmaker would be able to solicit contributions during that time and receive them. Would the lawmaker be able to solicit a contribution during the blackout period and then receive that same contribution, say, afterwards? So let's say the lawmaker asks for a contribution in May. Does the contribution have to come in before the blackout period, or could it conceivably come in, say, August or September of that same year?
Thank you again for the record, Jason Frierson. I think the point is less about the date of the request and more about the expense. I don't imagine that an appointed member would have an expense related to serving after being appointed in October. And so the point is it has to be applied only to the purposes of paying for living expenses during the term that they are serving. And so presumably at the end of the legislative session, they will be subject to the same limitations. The reason that it's all encompassed is because although that person would more than likely not have a reason to solicit any contributions after that, they may either have expenses that go after that, like a lease and the last month of a lease, or if there's a special session right afterwards. It's just really trying to put them on an even field with sitting legislators who had the ability for the entire interim to raise money to be able to pay for living expenses. But it's clear it can only be to pay for living expenses, moving and living expenses during service for the period that they're appointed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Assemblyman. Next, we have Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing this up and in recognizing that we don't do this for the money and we're not independently wealthy, most of us. So what I was looking at is the $1,200 for special session, and the special sessions are always like an indeterminate amount of time. And I mean, heaven forbid we're up here for 4 months on a special session. But it seems like the comparison of $1,200 for a special session is how'd you come up with that number? Is it just going through history and looking at how long special sessions normally last? Or is it just, you know, I mean, I've been through 2 special sessions. One lasted 2 weeks, one lasted 4 days. So my concern is that this may not cover someone who's appointed and we have a marathon special session, like we want to rename Clark County or something, and it takes 4 months to do it. So did you have any consideration for like a time period in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Jason Frierson. Although it wasn't entirely arbitrary, there is no, standard for how long a special session lasts. There is no ideal for whether or not somebody can get a hotel room or get a house or an apartment. It obviously, it depends on the nature of that particular special session. I would imagine if and when we propose to rename Clark County, Leavitt County, it would be a relatively fast special session. But, this is certainly not expected, nor do any of us have the ability to absorb all of our costs with the amount of money that is provided through the system. But this is progress to make sure that at least somebody has the ability to start, recognizing that some people may not, and they may decide not to even apply to be appointed because they simply can't afford it. This is just an effort, albeit not complete, and it's impossible to make it, I think, encompass an entire legislative process that we don't know the parameters for. But this is simply an effort to allow somebody who is applying to and being qualified to be appointed to serve, to be able to at least have some type of seed money to be able to live.
Thank you for that. Yes, thank you. And thank you for that. And I just, knowing that, having served in special sessions, housing alone is by nature much more expensive during a special session, simply because you have to stay at a hotel, which is more expensive than renting a house for 4 months. And I would approve of that motion that Speaker Frierson had to add, changing Clark County's name and adding it to this bill.
And I also remember Speaker saying that would be a very short special session. So with that, I would like to, I think there's a clarifying question that may help with this, Assemblyman Leavitt. During that special session that lasted 13 days this past summer, and I'm going to rely on our legal and everyone here. Isn't it true that as legislators, our hotel rooms were only covered for, was it the first 5 days or 10 days, 7 days? Who remembers?
I apologize. I do not recall. I recall it not being enough.
Correct. It did not cover the whole 13 days that we were here. And so then we had choices to either pay out of our pocket or pay out of campaign funds. But again, we also had individuals that were appointed for special session. And so the challenge with that was sincerely when it was the anticipation that, oh, your hotel rooms will be covered. And then even us sitting legislators were like, oh, wait, not all of the nights were covered. So I think with that, $1,200 is still not a lot. But if you're advocating for more, to make sure that individuals are covered for special session, as you said, if it was a long extended session. You don't need to answer, I'm just saying, I'm open to the amendment.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Madam Chair, I just want to go on record that I did not propose that amendment.
Okay, we're gonna let the bill sponsor
was simply asking
respond.
a clarifying question.
Thank you again, Jason Frierson, for the record. If I may, obviously, we can't encompass every possible scenario. More than likely, if we finish a regular session more than likely, any subsequent special session would be beyond 30 days. If someone was appointed for regular session, then they become a sitting legislator. So 30 days after the end of regular session, they could then fundraise. And so this is intending to really try to capture at least a narrow set of circumstances where someone is simply financially unable, even though they are qualified and may be an ideal choice to do it at all. And so it doesn't encompass every possible scenario, but if they're in a regular session and then they get a break and then there's a special, then they would be able to fundraise beyond that blackout period. So this is really narrowly tailored to be able to help someone afford to be able to serve. And then they would otherwise be subject to the same requirements, other than they would have to return the money, any unused money that wasn't going towards their living expenses, which the rest of us would not have to do.
Okay, not seeing any additional questions, so we now have additional questions. All right, grace extended on the first day back in the physical building. Okay, so then in that case, these will be our three final questions. Assemblyman Matthews, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, and Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblywoman Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize. I wanted to come back to Assemblywoman Dickman's line of questioning, and maybe it was made clear and I'm just missing it, in which case I apologize. But just for the sake of clarity, let's give a hypothetical. So it's 42 members of the Assembly. Someone resigns, someone is appointed to replace that person. The bills that were initially attached to the resigning legislator, those now can get assigned elsewhere, and now we're back at our full allotment of number of bills per legislator. But then we've got the newly appointed legislator. Does that legislator have his or her own BDRs to introduce? And if so, it would seem that could push up the total number of BDRs, but maybe I'm erring in that. Thank you.
Again, Jason Frierson for the record. Based on the deadlines, if somebody was appointed during session, they would already have missed the deadlines.
Okay, that's what I was assuming, but thank you for that clarity. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez, District 16 for the record. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I missed it, but how we all have like reporting deadlines, would they wait to report the money that they received? Are they still subject to reporting that information, and how would that work?
Thank you again, Jason Frierson for the record. They would be subject to the same reporting deadlines and requirements that the rest of us would be.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick comment. This was one of those bills that, hearing it clarified the intent so much better, so thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And with that, seeing no additional questions, I will take testimony in support. Again, we'll first start if there's anyone here in the room that would like to come to the front to testify in support, and then we'll move to Zoom and our telephones. And please remember to state your name clearly for the record and spell it, and you will have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Priscilla Maloney, M-A-L-O-N-E-Y. The first name is Priscilla, and I'm representing the AFSCME 4041 retiree chapter today. And you may say to yourself, well, what does this have to do with retirees? But actually, our third law and in our law and legislative committee, our third priority this session is are bills that have to do with the proper functioning and support for our wonderful citizen legislature, including a bill like this. We are also tracking campaign finance bills, so there's a little bit of that incorporated into this. And then finally, not at issue in this bill is voter access. And as one thing we have learned as an organization this last year, we really appreciate how well our government in Nevada has functioned and in this time of crisis. And so we very much thank Speaker Frierson for bringing this bill. We want to support good people like yourselves getting what they can, well, as Assemblyman Levitt said, there are other things that maybe a naming of a county that would make things even better, but again, some support for the incredible job that our citizen legislature is faced with doing when they are not given full-time compensation for their actual out-of-pocket costs. So thank you.
Not seeing anyone else in the room approaching, I would like to open it up to anyone on the telephone who's wishing to call in for a supportive testimony. Broadcasting, can you open the line, and do we have anyone on the phones?
Chair, this is Michael from Broadcast. The testimony line is open and working. However, we have no one to testify in support of AB 441.
Okay, and I'll give that just a moment because I know there's sometimes a minute lag. Do we have anyone on Zoom that's logged in to testify?
Chair, there is nobody on the Zoom that is here to testify either.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And broadcasting, is there anyone that has called in since for to testify in support?
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we continue to have no one to call in support of AB 441.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I will close the testimony for those calling in support, and we'll open the testimony for anyone that would like to testify in opposition. So if there's anyone in the room that would like to testify in opposition, I don't see anyone approaching the front. So I will then, broadcasting, can we open the telephone lines for anyone wishing to call and testify in opposition?
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we have no one on the call for opposition to AB 441.
Do we have anyone logged in on the Zoom to testify in opposition of AB 441?
Chair, there is also nobody in the Zoom in opposition.
Thank you. And with that, I will close the testimony for anyone in opposition, and we'll open it for anyone in neutral. Is there anyone in the room that would like to testify in neutral? Not seeing anyone approaching. Broadcasting, do we have anyone on the line that would like to testify in neutral?
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we have no one to testify in neutral on AB 441.
Thank you. Do we have anyone who'd like to testify in neutral on Zoom for AB 441?
Chair, there is nobody in neutral on the Zoom either.
Okay, thank you. With that, I will close the testimony for neutral. And I will ask the bill sponsor, Speaker Frierson, would you like to make some final remarks?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. For the record, Jason Frierson. Briefly, AB 441 is intended to allow the most qualified folks to be eligible to serve without having to be independently wealthy and have an extra burden that the rest of us were not required to endure. And I think it has adequate safeguards to make sure that they return the money. So as Assemblyman Levitt said, none of us are in this for the money, but we have to be able to live. And we have to be able to, put a roof over our heads during this time in Carson City. And this is an effort for anybody who's tried to recruit candidates to run for office. It is an increasingly difficult endeavor. And so if there's, on top of the burdens of financial limitation, it just makes it undoable for many. And this is attempting to remedy that effort. So I thank you all for your questions and giving me the opportunity to clarify concerns and your attention.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this legislation forward. And with that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 441. I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 443. Assembly Bill 443 will be presented by Assemblyman Steve Yeager, and it's providing the creation of the Joint Interim Standing Committees of the Legislature. And so, Assemblyman, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. It is nice to be here in person. I believe I testified in front of you over Zoom, but it's nice to be here up close and personal. For the record, I am Steve Yeager. I represent Assembly District 9, which is in southwest Las Vegas, and I am pleased to present Assembly Bill 443 for your consideration. This measure revises the way the Nevada Legislature structures its interim activities. Now, I'm looking around at committee members, and most of you have been here through an interim or two. A few of you have not. So I will tell you a little bit about what this bill does and then answer any questions. The concept in this bill dates back to the 2009-2010 legislative interim, and it was a recommendation of the interim committee to consult with the director, which unanimously supported Assembly Bill 578 of the 2011 session. In addition, a bill similar to this one was presented in 2017. The bill before you today revisits the matter and is designed to address the serious continuity issues concerning interim committees that still exist. Some background information. In the past, legislative leaders on both sides of the political spectrum have indicated the need for a better way to organize the interim study process and its structure. One of the issues over the years has been the number of legislators who are appointed to interim studies who have little or no knowledge of the topics that are being studied. Another related issue has been the number of bill draft requests submitted by those interim studies and then heard in session by a standing committee without any of the members who actually served on the interim committee. The members who had not served on the study committee did not have the benefit of sitting through important testimony and in-depth review that occurred during the interim, which went into producing the legislation. As early as the 1970s, the legislature recognized these concerns with our current structure. There was a lack of continuity from session to interim to the next session. Recognizing these concerns, the Committee to Consult with the Director studied this issue several years ago and adopted recommendations to create a new interim committee structure based on the existing session standing committee structure. That structure is what you see established here in the provisions of Assembly Bill 443. So I'll take you through some of the sections of the bill. It is a rather large bill, but the changes it makes are not difficult to understand, and we're really just folding a lot of existing committees into what would be the new committees. So to summarize, the measure applies to certain policy committees meeting during the interim that are staffed by the Legislative Council Bureau. This proposal, however, does not include the Interim Finance Committee, the Economic Forum, or the Legislative Commission and the statutory subcommittees that are affiliated with those entities. So just to be clear, those would continue to exist as they exist now. Section 6 of this bill really is the heart of the proposal. With the exceptions I just noted, Section 6 creates several joint interim standing committees that parallel the jurisdiction of our session standing committees. The names of those committees are on page 5 of the bill, and if you take a look at those, I think you'll find those to be very familiar because they're the same committees that we have here during the session. Regarding the membership of those joint interim standing committees, each would consist of 8 regular members and 5 alternate members. There would be 5 assembly members with 3 alternates and 3 Senate members with 2 alternates. Of the 5 assembly members, 3 would be appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly, and 2 would be appointed by the minority leader of the Assembly. 2 of the alternate assembly members would be appointed by the Speaker, and 1 alternate would be appointed by the minority leader. Of the 3 senators, 2 would be appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, and 1 would be appointed by the Senate Minority Leader, and then the alternates would be 1 apiece from the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader. Section 7 establishes, with regard to quorum and voting, that 5 members of a joint interim standing committee would constitute a quorum. However, any recommended legislation must be approved by a majority of both the Senate members and the Assembly members. Other actions can be taken by a majority of those present. The BDR allocations for the joint interim statutory committees are set forth in Section 4 of the bill. Just like our current interim statutory committees, each joint interim committee would be allocated 10 BDRs to carry forward to the following legislative session. Section 8 of the bill specifies the topics to be reviewed by these committees, and they would be established through legislation or as directed by the Legislative Commission. In addition, topics that are within the jurisdiction of the session committees would be assigned to the interim committees to handle as a whole or through subcommittees during the interim. Each joint interim standing committee would be required to report on all of its activities and deliberations to the next legislative session. Section 8 also specifies that the Legislative Commission will review the budget and work program of each of these committees. In some cases involving existing statutory committees, such as the Legislative Committee on Healthcare and the Legislative Committee on Education, there are numerous references throughout the NRS to those committees, how they receive reports, how they are to carry out their duties. The bulk of the bill reassigns those duties to what would be the joint interim standing committees. Starting around Section 13 of the bill onward, those duties that exist with our current statutory committees are reassigned. Most of these sections involve the joint interim standing committees on Education, Government Affairs, Health and Human Services, and Judiciary. And we're almost there. So Section 52 of the bill includes transitory language to capture any other bills or resolutions that may be under consideration during this legislative session that assign a power or duty to an interim standing committee that would be abolished if this bill were to be passed. Specifically, the bill allows the Legislative Council, in revising the NRS, to assign the power or duty or require the document or report to be submitted to the appropriate joint standing committee. As I mentioned, this measure directs the Legislative Commission to approve the work program for each of the joint standing committees. As noted in Section 52, if the subject matter of a legislative study or investigation falls within the jurisdiction of more than one of the joint interim standing committees, the Legislative Commission will assign the study based on the budgets and work programs. In short, if Assembly Bill 443 is approved, the Legislative Commission would direct when the joint interim standing committees could start their work and decide upon the work of each committee based on the committee's jurisdiction. Finally, I would note that Assembly Bill 443 does not repeal NRS 218E.200. It is only amended in Section 11, which still gives the Legislative Commission broad authority to establish other subcommittees and investigate various matters as needed. The Commission would still have the authority to direct other studies that could be outside the scope or purview of a joint interim standing committee or that might be deserving of a special legislative attention. And before I take questions, I'll just note that those of you who have served in the interim, towards the end of session, you get a list of interim committees that you can preference, and I don't know how many there are, but it seems like there's 80 to 100 of them, and it seems like a lot of them overlap. So what you have in front of you is an effort to really make the legislative process more efficient in the interim so that when we come back to the next regular session, we can really hit the ground running. So thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And thank you, Assemblyman, for bringing this measure forward, for presenting it. I forgot to mention earlier that this one actually does come from the Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, but you were so kind to step in and present for us. Thank you. With that, our first question comes from Vice Chair Howdiggy.
Thank you so much, Chair Miller. And thank you for presenting, Assemblyman Yeager. I think this is such a great bill. I remember having these discussions when I had the honor of chairing legislative operations and elections with my policy analyst, Ms. Carol Stonefield, at the time, and always wanting this to come to fruition. So I'm so happy that I'm actually seeing it here today. But just to clarify, I know, for example, the Sunset Subcommittee, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to reaffirm it, 'cause the Sunset Subcommittee is a subcommittee of the Legislative Commission, so that would not be targeted, right? Because it's a subcommittee of the Legislative Commission.
Steve Yeager, for the record, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Howdiggy. You are correct. So we're not doing anything with the Legislative Commission, with Interim Finance Committee. They're going to continue to do their work, so that would continue to exist. And then in addition, if the Legislative Commission decided that there was some other issue that needed to be looked at, they could, create that and assign it to one of the standing committees, or they could create their own subcommittee to do it.
And if I could, Madam Chair, just to follow up? Okay, and then also, I noticed throughout the bill, like you can see how the references are changing, like how the interim committee on healthcare becomes the interim committee on health and human services, the interim committee on industrial relations becomes the interim committee on judiciary. So is this completely eliminating all statutory interim committees? I'm asking this because I've sat on this every single interim, and I love the committee, but the interim committee for Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, would that be folded into natural resources?
Steve Yeager, for the record, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Howdiggy. Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Yeager, for the record, I think that one continues to exist, and I think we'll hear some more testimony on that, but generally speaking, you're right that most of them are folded into other standing committees. I think the one exception you'll see in the bill, if you look at the very end of the bill, on page 45, so it's your second to last page of text, there's lead lines of repealed sections. So that section that's proposed to be repealed is the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice, which is a very large committee. So that's the one that very clearly gets repealed by this bill. And just so everyone knows, I'm having some further discussions about that committee. I had the pleasure of chairing that committee in 2 interims ago. They do some really good work, and so there is some concern that's been raised about that, but I think that's the only one that really is statutorily deleted. The rest of them have their duties folded in, with a couple exceptions, one of which which is the Tahoe one.
Oh, I thought so, and I just wanted to be clear to make sure I was reading everything correctly. Thank you so much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Vice Chair. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. You said the committees would be 8 members? So if they have to vote on something, on, say, what bill gets put through, how's there a majority?
Steve Yeager, for the record. A good question, Assemblywoman Dickman. So the way that it has to work on a vote is it has to be a majority of the senators and a majority of the assembly people. So you would need 3 of 5 assembly people and 2 of 3 senators. So it's in that way, it's not necessarily, if it was like 4-4 vote, it would fail. It would need 5 votes, and they would have to come in that specific way to make sure that each house of the legislature is having a say. And that's much like our study committees work now, that we usually put 3 senators and 3 assembly people, and you have to get 2 Senate votes and 2 assembly votes, or the measure doesn't pass.
Thanks for that. That was good math.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Speaker Frierson?
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of questions. The first is one that I don't think was, at least on its face, addressed, and that is, it seems to me, am I hitting the wrong button? My light is not, there we go, my light's not working, but it seems to me that this, an indirect benefit, and I just want you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that this would probably save a significant amount of money in staff time. Because currently we would have to staff several random interim committees, and this would allow standing committee staffs to continue to serve those subject matters, and have, be spread out much less thinly. So am I misunderstanding, or it just seems to me, and I'll say selfishly, because for the last 4 years, I've been the one to have to appoint all of these interim committees. It takes a great deal of work and coordination, and if we already have a structure in place, it would certainly save time in that aspect. But if you could enlighten me to some extent on the impact that this would have on LCB staff and their ability to be more efficient with how they staff interim committees.
Thank you, Speaker Frierson. I think you have recognized one of the issues, and I think you're absolutely correct in your analysis that, during a typical interim, and I'll grant you last interim was not a typical interim because of a global pandemic, but normally it seems like there are committees meeting every day, and they're trying to decide whether the meeting's going to be in Carson City, whether it's going to be in Las Vegas, and there's a lot of travel and staff time involved in staffing those. not to speak of just the difficulty with coordinating people's schedules, since most of us have jobs during the interim. So I think this would save time. It would save money, not just during the interim, but leading into a session, to really be able to, to take an example of this committee. If there was an interim committee on legislative operations and elections, and 5 of you would serve on that interim committee, and then presumably would come back, and several of you, if not all of you, would be on this committee again. So you've had an entire interim to look at some of these issues. And my hope would be that, we start off the session and we usually have a lot of presentations in committees. We get people acclimated to the topics. We would still need to do some of that for new members. But I think for some of the veteran members, it would help us hit the ground running just a little bit more in that way. And I think it would really make for a more effective interim, both financially and on the policy side.
If I may have just a couple of follow-ups. And I don't know the answer to this question, and I don't know if this weighed into how many bills those interim committees were allocated. But again, having had to appoint so many interim committees, it seems to me that another impact of this policy would be fewer bills. Am I off in that? Because not all interim committees get bill drafts, but many do. Not just our standing or our existing interim committees, but a lot of the smaller committees maybe get 1 or 2 bills. I don't want to misspeak, but it seems to me that this would likely result in fewer overall bill drafts being submitted as well.
Steve Yeager for the record. Speaker Frierson, I think you're correct. I'll have to do an analysis of it because, as you say, there are certain statutory committees that get BDRs, and usually it's 10. But then there are just other committees that we've given a BDR here, we've given a BDR there. So I do think the net impact would be fewer BDRs, but hopefully more well-vetted BDRs, because any of you who've served on interim committees, sometimes what happens is you get to that work session at the end and no one's real sure about what's going on because maybe you've only had 3 or 4 meetings and you haven't really had a chance to dig in. And so a lot of those concepts I think that get advanced are very vague, they're very unclear. And we sort of hope that our drafters get it right in the drafting process. And, they do a wonderful job, but they're limited by the information we provide them for how to draft legislation. So I think we'll see better bill drafts coming into a session as a result of the structure.
Thank you. And one final, Madam Chair, if I may. Does this bill prohibit a committee chair in the interim from forming a subcommittee that could vet an issue that is unique? And maybe I am recalling when I was chair of judiciary and HOA issues were the policy du jour, and we formed a subcommittee that was able to fully vet those issues separate from the existing committee. It could be foreclosures 1 year, it could be parole and probation out of judiciary another year. Does this bill still preserve an interim committee chair person's ability to form a subcommittee to go on a deeper dive on any particular issue that could be more complicated or worthwhile?
Steve Yeager for the record. Speaker Frierson, I don't think anything in the bill precludes that. The one qualification I'll make is the way that the bill is drafted now. When we got to the point of that the interim joint standing committee has to present basically a work plan to the legislative commission to say, these are all the things that we're going to have to look at this interim. Now, some of those are statutory that are in the bill. They have to do them. But I think the chair would be able to say, I would also like to examine this issue or have a subcommittee. That gets presented to the legislative commission. And the real reason for that is we have to budget for these. How many meetings are we talking about? How much travel time? How much staff time? So the legislative commission is going to have a role there to play in coming up with the accurate budget. So I think they could request that, but I also think there's going to be the legislative commission oversight to maybe sometimes say, look, it looks like maybe you've bit off way more than you can chew. Maybe we should scale some of this back, or maybe we can give that issue to another interim joint standing committee. So there'll be the oversight there, but I really do think the chairs and vice chairs of the committee and the members of the committee will be able to have a discussion about what they would like to do in the interim and ask for the legislative commission's approval to do those things.
Assemblyman Levitt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe I missed it or didn't understand it. So these interim committees, would they have control over the committee bills that come before the regular session, or is that still going to be later on?
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. So are you referring to Steve Yeager for the record, are you referring to the committee bills that are requested now by standing chairs?
Yes, like the bill we're hearing right now. Would this fall under an interim committee? Would they be the ones that come up with these bills?
Steve Yeager for the record. So I think I understand the question, so let me just give you how I see it happening. But I think the standing committees, the interim joint committees, so the ones that are going to be created by this bill, they're all going to have 10 BDRs to request. Now, the interesting part of that is you have membership of the Senate and the Assembly. So, when those bills get requested, there'll have to be some way to figure out whether they're going to the Assembly or the Senate to start. But if your question is, would these bills be in addition to the bills requests that standing committee chairs can request? I'll have to be honest that I don't know the answer to that. Sitting here right now, I'm not sure. So I'll have to get back to you on that because, as you all know, the standing chairs can request a number of bills in the interim, and that's based on the number of bills that were referred to that committee in the previous session. So I don't know if these would supplant those or if they're in addition. So I'll have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And would legal maybe be able to respond to that?
Sorry. Kathleen Norris for the record from the legal division. Typically, the standing committees, so of this legislative committee, get their own BDR requests. So the requests in this bill would be addition and separate and apart from those requested by chairs of standing committees.
Thank you for that. Any additional questions, members? Assemblywoman Dickman?
Thank you so much for the indulgence, Madam Chair. So just along those lines, but we would be replacing a number of bills that would come from these other committees that would now fall under the new committees, right?
Steve Yeager for the record. Assemblywoman Dickman, you are correct about that because the way that the structure works now, there are already a lot of committees that get like 10 BDRs, like the education, healthcare. So I think by condensing these, I'll have to do an analysis of it, but I don't think we're going to be in a situation where there will be more BDRs coming out of an interim. I think there'll be fewer as a whole. And again, you don't have to request all 10 as well. Now sometimes we think that we all do that, but if you have an interim that's really focused on one or two issues, maybe only request a few of those.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a question, Assemblyman, and I'm just wondering because there seems to be a concern about where everything will go. So currently now we know that in the Assembly that we refer to specific committees and that process happens on the floor as those bills are coming in. So is there a process? We talked about the Senate Majority Leader and the Assembly Speaker. Will they determine, do you know, or are we kind of ahead on where the process is on how we will make sure that the topics that need to be covered are sent to the appropriate committee?
Steve Yeager for the record. So a couple things, and I'll answer it this way, and hopefully this gets at the heart of the question. But I think there's sort of two parts to that question. One is, what is the interim joint standing committee going to do? And some of that is statutory. But if there are additional topics, or if we pass interim study bills, I think the Ledge Commission would be the appropriate authority to decide which of the new joint standing interim committees are going to take up those topics. And then I think the second part to the question is, let's assume one of these committees requests 10 BDRs. The question is, well, where do those go? Do those start in the Assembly? Do those start in the Senate? And I think LCB has a process for probably divvying those up in some sort of fair way so that the workload between the Senate and the Assembly would hopefully be the same, because that is a little different now. Typically with a study committee we would do now, usually whoever the chair of the committee is, whatever house the chair is from, that's where the bills would start. Although I think this session we saw some exceptions to that.
Okay, and again, I'm confident in the process. I would like to clarify, if we could, with Speaker Frierson, as he does participate in making these assignments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just felt compelled to clarify, during session, majority leadership decides where bills go. So this would not be able to tie those hands. There are times where a bill that is by chapter regarding government affairs, but by substance might be more appropriate for judiciary. And majority leadership can that we did it just today in assigning bills. And that's what we do when we have second reading is or introductions rather, is we decide. So this would not change that. The way that session operates is not impacted by this. We have our standing rules of how bills get assigned, and that would remain.
And so with that process remains from after the interim where the bill once session begins. But again, looking forward to the process of committees that we're eliminating where that work that would typically occur will occur. So, and I look forward. I know you don't have that response, so I look forward to as we move forward with that. So thank you, and thank you, Speaker, for clarifying. With that, members, any additional questions? Not seeing any questions, then thank you for presenting this for us, Assemblyman Yeager. And I will open it up for anyone that would like to testify in support. Again, you will have 2 minutes, and we ask that you state your name clearly and spell it for the record. I will first open it up to anyone that would like to testify in support that's here in the room. Not seeing anyone approach, I will then open it up to the telephones. So broadcasting, can you please open the lines?
If you'd like to testify in support of AB 443, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 500, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Helen Foley, HELEN-FOLEY, and I am delighted to speak on behalf and in support of this legislation today. As a former Assemblywoman and state senator, and also a lobbyist for many decades, this is not coming soon enough. It's been very frustrating to see interim committees where you put your heart and soul into something, and then when you get to the legislative session, everyone has moved on to something else, or they're on different committees, and they don't have the dedication and passion to the issue. We also find many times during the interim that unforeseen issues arise, and it would be ideal to be able to have one of these standing committees be able to deal with the issue seamlessly. And so I congratulate Steve Yeager and everyone that has been supporting these issues. It's a long time coming. I know I was working a couple of sessions ago with Nicole Cannizzaro trying to get this into place. It makes so much more sense than what we currently have, and I congratulate you and urge you for its passage.
Thank you.
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we have no more callers in support of AB 443.
Thank you. Do we have anyone on Zoom to testify in support?
Sir, there is nobody in the Zoom room at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then I will close the opportunity to testify in support and open it up for anyone wishing to testify in opposition. And we will first begin here in the room.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Holly Wellborn. Do I have to spell that? HOLLYWELBORN. I'm the policy director for the ACLU of Nevada. You all look amazing. It's wonderful to be here in person with you today. My opposition to this bill is quite passive, and in fact, I agree with a lot of what my dear friend Helen Foley just shared with you all. But I do think it's important for this committee to understand some of the consequences of dissolving interim committees. I'll first start with the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice. I am appointed by Governor Sisolak. I had been previously appointed by Governor Sandoval to that committee as the inmate advocate. By dissolving the ACAJ, we are choosing to dissolve one of the only committees in the state where we have an inmate advocate and where we have a victim advocate who are voting members of those commissions, that commission. There's also the Nevada Sentencing Commission, where I am also appointed as the inmate advocate, where there also is a victim advocate to serve who can weigh in on some of these issues. But that is an executive commission that does have some, can provide some recommendations to the legislature. So I think it's important for us to understand the impact of that by losing that vote. But I think after, a lot of reflection, that commission is quite unbalanced. It's not equal voices on each side of the issue. Those victims' rights voices and the inmate rights voices are often outweighed by other interests on that commission. So we're not fully opposed to dissolving it, but I do think it's important for the record to reflect what that will mean in terms of advocacy for both victim advocates and for inmate advocates. But my most pressing concern is dissolving the Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice Committee. I have concerns that by forming an interim judiciary committee, that those issues that are pertinent to young people, to youth, we do a lot of work on that commission. I've been working with Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno on youth advocacy and
Ms.
removing...
Wellborn, that was your 2 minutes. Oh. And so I would invite you to submit the rest of your concerns in, directly so that we can get them on the record. And of course, that you're more than welcome to speak with individual members to continue to share your concerns.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes, actually, your 2 minutes have been extended. You got a lifeline because Vice Chair Howdiggy has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence, and thank you, Ms. Wellborn, for sticking around to answer my question. But do you think that they would be able to still perform their same functions if they were a subcommittee? I know that the sponsor kind of touched on the fact that each standing interim committee can appoint a subcommittee to study certain issues that they feel might need more attention. So would you still be able to perform the same functions?
Thank you, Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Howdiggy. Thank you so much for that question. And that's what I was intending to wrap up my testimony with, is some recommendations. What I would like to see is a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee that is on youth justice issues. I think that's the right solution, and I look forward to working with Assemblyman Yeager on an amendment to that. And I'm Holly Wellborn, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada, for the record. Thank you.
And thank you for that. With that, I would like to open the lines for anyone testifying in opposition that is on the phone. So broadcasting, do we have anyone on the lines?
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we have no one to testify in opposition to AB 443.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom?
Chair, there is still no one on Zoom.
Thank you for that. I would like to open up I would close testimony in opposition and open it for anyone testifying in neutral. Seeing no one in the room approaching for neutral, I would like to open up the lines. So broadcasting, do we have anyone in the queue that would like to testify in neutral?
Chair, the testimony line is open and working. However, we have no callers to testify in neutral on AB 443.
Thank you. Do we have anyone on Zoom who would like to testify in neutral?
Chair, there is nobody to testify in neutral in the Zoom.
Thank you. So with that, I will ask the bill sponsor, Assemblyman Yeager, if you would like to come up and make some final remarks.
Steve Yeager, for the record. Just to address a couple of things. One, to make clear, the bill would not eliminate any executive branch committees. So the Sentencing Commission is now within the executive branch. So this only applies to committees that are staffed by the Legislative Counsel Bureau. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. With respect to the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice, clearly a committee that's near and dear to my heart. One of the issues we've had with that committee, though, is they don't have any bill draft requests. And we've resisted giving them bill draft requests, and I think for good reason. But I do think moving some of their duties into this interim joint standing committee solves that problem, because often on that committee, you get to the end of the process, you have a work session, and there are like 12 or 15 ideas and 0 BDR. So it's up to the members, the legislative members of that committee, there are 4 of them, to request those measures, and some of them don't get requested. But as Ms. Wellborn stated, we're certainly still talking about some of these concepts. I very much appreciate her concern about juvenile issues, and those sometimes do get lost in the broader discussion of judiciary. So I'll continue to work with her on seeing if we can find a solution for that. And then, so just in closing, Assembly Bill 443 is designed to address the conceptual inefficiency that others have identified in our interim study structure. We spend so much time and money jumping into these complex policy issues and conceptual matters during the interim. We vet the solutions thoroughly before the committees to send them to the session. However, these bills are often sent to committees whose members were not there for the discussion. The system is at best inefficient. At worst, it really does relegate some exceptional policy solutions to the legislative graveyard. And that is very unfortunate, because that work is hard work and it matters, and sometimes it just gets lost as we transition from the interim to the regular committee, the regular session. So, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, this concludes my presentation, and it sure was an honor to appear in front of you this evening. I urge your support for the bill, and I'm happy to take any other questions offline.
Thank you, Assemblyman, for bringing this forward. And with that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 443. Our next agenda item is to take public comment. And again, each person will have the opportunity to speak for up to 2 minutes. And we ask that it's a topic that is under the purview of this committee. Please again state your name and spell it for the record. And broadcasting, when you're ready, please open up the lines for anyone wishing to make public comment.
If you would like to make public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public comment line is open and working. However, we don't have any callers at this time.
Okay, we'll give it just a moment for those watching on YouTube and on Nellis, knowing that we're about a minute off. Broadcasting, has anyone attempted to call in?
Nope, Chair, the public comment line is open and working, or we have no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. With that, I will close public comment. And members, thank you so much for your diligence and your questions today and working through these bill hearings. We have nothing left on our agenda. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, April 27th. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.